In this tutorial, we're going to make this cabled beanie called the Calder Beanie by Sarah Hatton. It's a free pattern which you can download from the Rowan website, and I've included a link below so that you can do that. So if you're confident with both the knit stitch and the purl stitch and casting on, and you'd like to try to learn cabling, then I really want to encourage you to follow along and knit this hat. The design is a 2x2 rib, that's knit 2 stitches, purl 2 stitches alternatively, and has only one row of cabling in every 10 rows. So most of the hat is knitted in a simple rib, and the same one difficult cable row is repeated only 5 times. So this makes it a great hat for a beginner. The hat is knitted in the flat, and then there's a seam that's sewn up the back at the end. And in this video, I'm going to take you step by step through the whole construction of the hat, including showing you in great detail this one difficult cable row, and then sewing up the seam at the end. So at any time, if you wish to go directly to a new section on this video, I have links to the different sections in the program notes so that you'll be able to do that. For this hat, I'm using the Rowan Pure Wool Superwash DK. There's around 32 colours in this yarn, and I'm using the lovely heathered purple colour called Loam. It's number 106. So I've provided a link below so that you can check out the yarn as well. Get your copy of the free pattern and your yarn, and then I'll love to see you in the next section where we'll be making a gauge and casting on. So making a gauge is important, and it really doesn't take long. It gives you an opportunity to learn the pattern before you start the hat. So because the pattern is a 2x2 rib, knitting it is going to be very easy. Most of the rows are just 2x2 rib, but it also means that the knitting is going to be pulled in a lot on the sides. So when you're making a gauge, just gently pin out the sides and leave a wet cloth over the top for it to dry, and then you should get a flat swatch that you can measure like this. So you'll notice that this is 2x2 rib pretty well all the way except for one row, and that's where you're going to do your cabling. But you can see very clearly the 2 knit stitches all the time, but it's harder to see the purl stitches, and that's typical for negative ease, which 2x2 rib creates. It means it squashes it in, and you see a lot of the knit stitches but not much of the purl stitches. So when we're measuring our swatch, I'm going to put the edge of my tape measure just to the end of the purl stitches. So even though it doesn't look much, I've got 2 purl stitches in here, 2 purl stitches in here, 2 purl stitches in there, there, and there. So if I was doing a swatch in this wool, and I'm using the Rowan Pure Wool Superwash DK, which has got the same gauge as the Rowan Tweed, which is what the pattern recommends. The gauge is, I think, 22 stitches per 10 centimeters. If I was doing a swatch in stocking stitch, so knit 1 row, purl backwards, knit 1 row, then my gauge would be 22 stitches for 10 centimeters. But I'm looking now and hopefully have 28.5 stitches for 10 centimeters. That's because of the negative ease. So let's count and see what happens. So I've got the tip of my tape measure here, and I've got 2 in here, so that's going to be 2, 4, another 2 purl stitches in there, 6, 8, another 2 purl stitches in there, 10, 12, 2 purl stitches in there, 14, 16, 18 for these purl stitches, 20 purl stitches in here, make it 22, 24, purl stitches in there, 26, 28, there's my 10, you can't see it very well because it's an old measure. So I've pretty well got 28.5 stitches, so that's good. If you've got more than that or less than that, then you need to change up or down a needle size to correct it. So try going down half a needle size first. So this is knitted on the recommended 4mm needle, so you might try 3.5 to start off with, or 4.5, depending on how many stitches you got. Okay, so I'm going to take my pins out and then we'll get started. My pins are in very well. So because it's a hat, it doesn't have to be completely perfect, but you certainly don't want to have about 3 or 4 stitches out. That'll make a difference. So I put the gauge swatch to the side. And I've started casting on for the required. If you look at your pattern, the pattern will tell you how many stitches to cast on. And we're knitting it in the flat with a seam. So we're going to knit along and then knit back and knit along like this, and in the end we'll do a seam. Okay, so when you have so many stitches that you need to cast on, it's a good idea to put a stitch mark every 50. So I've casted on 50 here and I've double checked, yes, it's definitely 50, and I've put on a stitch marker, and then I count the next 50, put on a stitch marker. So when I come to the end, I don't have to keep going back and counting from the beginning, especially if I make a mistake and I have to go back. I can just see that's 50, it's 100, etc. So we're using the long tail method of casting on. And if you need to see a slower instructional video on how to do this, I've got one. I've got a link in my program notes. So I just have to untangle the tail from the mane. Here we go. So we're starting. Make sure that you do not start with your tail. So we've isolated the tail, and we're going to stick him over here and the working yarn over to my right. And now I'm going to use the long tail method of cast on to cast on the remaining stitches. So I hold the tail in my hand like this. I put my thumb over the top and around. The needle goes through and I knit, and with my left hand thumb I put the loop over and I pull with my left hand. Remember to pull with the left hand and not with the right hand, because if you pull with the right hand, the stitches will get very, very tight and hard to move on the needle. So I just pull with my left hand. Good. So now I can take out all of my markers. I've got the correct amount of stitches. And I'm ready to start my 2x2 rib, which is knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, purl 2, etc., all the way down the line. And then when you get back, you're just going to follow the pattern you've already created, which means that you knit the knit stitches and you purl the purl stitches. So it's always a little bit stiff when we're starting knitting after casting on. Now the pattern says to start off with a purl 2. Now I never purl the first and last stitches of my knitting. I always knit them. So even if the pattern starts off saying purl 2, I will always knit the first one. And if it ends saying purl 2, which it does on this row, I will purl the second last one and then knit the last one. And the reason why I do that is it creates a very sturdy, strong edge on the fabric. Otherwise it goes sloppy, and we do want a straight edge that's sturdy because it makes seaming and sewing up the seam a lot easier. So I recommend that you do that too. So I'm going to start off with a knit one. And then I put my yarn to the front where it always needs to be for purl, and I purl one. Okay, so we can just pretend that there we've done the first 2 purls, and then we have to do knit 2 and then purl 2. And we have to make sure we do this correctly because this sets the pattern on the first row. So remember, knitting, you're putting, this is on small needles with small wool, you're putting your needle behind the first stitch, up and through, round it goes. So needle behind the first stitch. And we have to always make sure that we bring the yarn, the working yarn, underneath the needle when we're going from purl to knit and knit to purl. If we bring it over the top or forget to do it and just simply go ahead and purl, so I've done 2 knit stitches, I'm up to a purl. If I was to go ahead and do that, look, I'm going to cause a big mess. That's a typical mistake for a beginner. Now I have to get out of this big mess. There. Okay, so always bringing the yarn underneath the needle when we're moving it from front to back. So purl 2, knit 2, purl 2, whoops, knit 2. So I'm going to see you at the end of this row, and I will show you again how to knit the knits to recognize the knit stitches and purl stitches, okay, and knit backwards. Okay, so here we are at the end of our first row, and what I forgot to tell you about is we're starting off on the smaller size needles. So the pattern requires 2 size needles, and we need to use the smaller size needles to start off with for the first 3 centimeters, because we want the lower part of the hat to be like a band, to be tighter and fit snugly around the head. So just doing the last of the 2x2 rib, I'm up to 2 purls. So knit 2, and we're up to the last 2, and we're told to purl them. So I'm just going to purl the first one, like I said, take the yarn around to the back and knit the last one, and that's going to keep the edge really nice and sturdy. So we're up to row 2. Row 2 is simply going to be knit the knits and purl the purls. So because it's our very first stitch, we knit it. And then we have a look, and that's a knit stitch. You can see, maybe the camera doesn't pick this up, but you can see there's a V underneath the stitch on the needle. There's a V. So we know it's a knit stitch, so I'm going to knit that one. So that would be our knit 2. Now the next 2 stitches have got a horizontal lump going from left to right or right to left. So we know we have to purl these 2. So I'm going to purl them. And the next 2 stitches have got V's on them. V's coming down like this. So they're knit stitches. So I must put the wool to the back and knit those 2 stitches. The next 2 I can see are purls. So on I go and continue. So if you look at and read your pattern, you'll see that the first few rows are just simply going to be knitting and purling in a 2x2 rib. So continue to do that until we come up to row 5, and that's where we're going to do our cabling. So I'll see you there. Now we are ready for the cable pattern row, and for that we need to use our cable needle. So cable needles roughly look like this, but they do come in different shapes. You can do a cable without using a needle, but for an inexperienced knitter, it's better to start off learning how to cable with a cable needle so you can understand how we're twisting the stitches around each other and understand how that works first. I will do later instructional videos on how to knit without a cable needle. So we're up to our cable row, pattern row, and it tells us to start off with purl 2. Now, as I told you before, I never purl the outside stitches on a row. So I'm going to knit 1, and then, oh, my needle's curling up, and then purl 1. Okay, so that's the purl 2. Then it says to knit 2 and purl 2. So I've got purl 2, knit 2, purl 2, and you're going to have this pattern in between each of the cables. Purl 2, knit 2, purl 2. Now it tells you to slip the next 4 stitches onto the cable needle, and it's important to slip them purlwise, so not knitwise. Slipping a stitch knitwise would mean that you put in the cable needle behind the stitch and up through here, just as if we were going to knit it. But we're going to put it from right to left, as if we're going to purl it. So you can do 2 at a time or 4 at a time, but you slip the next 4 stitches onto the cable needle and you leave at the front of the work. So now we need to knit 2, and we can tell that we're going to be correct because we have a column of knit 2 stitches here, and this pattern basically is knitting the knits and purling the purls. So our yarn is to the back of the fabric, and we're going to knit 2, and the first knit I'm going to knit very tightly to bring these 2 stitches close to these 2 stitches. Okay, so I've knitted 2. Then it tells us to slip the first 2 purl stitches on the cable needle back onto the left hand needle. So again, we're going to slip like this so that the stitches stay correct on the needle. Now, a stitch that is correct on the needle is going to look like this. So the front loop of the stitch is going to be forward and the back loop is going to be back. So that side of the stitch is going to be slightly back. This side of the stitch is going to be slightly forward. Okay, so we've done that. And then we have to leave the remaining 2 stitches on the cable needle at the back of the work. So we slide the cable needle between the 2 normal needles and hold it at the back of the work. We get our working yarn and we're ready to purl stitches. And I've got 2 purl stitches here waiting for me to be purled. So I move the working yarn to the front of the fabric so that we can purl, and we purl the next 2 stitches. Now I'm going to move the working yarn to the back of the fabric, and I'm going to slide the back 2 stitches down to the end of the cable needle because we're told to knit 2 from the cable needle. And so now I'm ready to knit these 2, and I can pinch them with my fingers in the left hand to make sure I have them under control and they're not going to fall off the needle, and I knit them. Okay, so now we're finished. We've got this big squashed up mess here, and that's fine. And then we're going to purl 2, knit 2, purl 2. And that's what we have between each of our cabling, a purl 2, a knit 2 and a purl 2. So we're ready again. So I'll show you again. We slip the next 4 needles, and you can do it 1 at a time to make sure that you don't split the wool if you like, onto our cable needle, and we leave at the front of the work. And then we need to knit the next 2 stitches, and there they are, and there's 2 columns of knit stitches, so I know I'm correct, and I'm going to knit this first one tight so it's right next to my previous stitch, and I'm not going to have a big hole there. And now we have to slip the last 2 needles from the cable and their purl stitches back on to the left hand needle, and careful there, I nearly split my wool, and leave the remaining 2 knit stitches that are on the cable needle at the back of the work. So always when I'm purling, I have to move my working yarn to the front, and now I purl these 2 stitches, and I'm ready to knit the 2 stitches on the cable needle from behind, so my working yarn goes to the back, and I slide those stitches down the end of my cable needle like this, and there they are ready to be knit, and I knit them. So I can pull them apart with my fingernail, knit 1, knit 2, we can put the cable needle down, and I'm ready to do my purl 2, knit 2, and purl 2. you're going to continue to do that all the way down to the end. So I'm going to show you how to put your stitches back correctly on the needle if you know you've done a mistake, for instance, in here, and it looks a real mess. This is pretty hard to tell whether you've got a mistake, but just say you know you've done a mistake. So you're going to take these needles off and try to back pedal through them. You need to pinch the fabric here underneath these stitches with your with your thumb and forefinger of the left hand so that the stitches don't run further down, and then slowly pull out the stitches like this. And what we're going to do is very slowly with the wool pull through, and you can feel that the wool does a little tug and release, and you know, oh, it's let go of one stitch, let go of the other, finally let go of all of them. And I'm stopping the stitches from running right down to the end. And now I straighten out my stitches, and look, you can see some of these stitches are really big and some of them are really small going down to the row below. That's because these stitches have been extra stretched in the twist. So the most important thing to do is to get your stitches back on the needle as quick as possible before they run down further. So even if it is the row below, like just say this one here, just use your cable needle because it's smaller. It's easier to pick up stitches on a smaller size needle than you've been using. So just any old way, doesn't matter if it's on the wrong way, you just want to get them on a needle as fast as possible. Okay, now you can relax because it's not going to go down further. Now what I'm going to do is try to get all of these stitches in the correct way back onto the left hand needle. So first of all, I'm just going to transfer them onto the right hand needle any old way. Slipping them across. Now again, like I said before, you want your needle, your stitch. Okay, so this is when I talk about the front loop, I'm talking about this bit here, and the back loop is that bit there. So the front loop has to be forward and the back loop has to be slightly back. So your stitches will sit on the needle like this. Okay, so we slip the needle across to the left hand and we look at it, and you can see that the back loop is slightly forward, so that's on the wrong way. So to make it on the right way, we just keep turning it around between the tips of our needles, and now it's on the right way. So up to the next stitch, and we can see that's also the wrong way. The back loop is forward. So I turn it around, now it's right. Next one, now that one's right. You can see how the front loop is already forward. Now we come to the next one and we notice we've got a band of wool here. So that means we picked up the stitch and it had already dropped down to the row below. It's a little scary, but because it's a purl stitch, it's harder to knit up to the row higher on a purl side. So we turn our work around and you'll notice that now it's a knit stitch. So the first thing I want to do is get the stitch correct, and then I'm going to knit it up. So I get that band of wool yarn and I put it over the edge of my needle like this, and I get this knit stitch, stretch it and pull it over the top. Now that stitch has come up from the row, has been knitted up from the row below and is on the same row as all these other stitches. So I can turn it around back again and we can have a look at it, and it's on the wrong way on the stitch, so we need to correct that and turn it around like that. Oh dear, we've got another one the same way. Back we go. Oh, my circular needles are driving me crazy. So the back loop here is the wrong way. Let's first of all knit it up. So I put it over to the right hand needle. I get the yarn of wool that it's got to be knitted onto. up also on my right hand needle, and then I slip this stitch over the top and it's been knitted up correctly. So I turn my work back again, find my working yarn, and have a look at the stitch. Now it's not correct because the back loop is forward, so I manoeuvre it back, slip on the next stitch. That's correct, that's good. Oh, and I've got another one that's dropped through, but this time it's on a knit stitch, so I can just leave it here. And again, I take the band and I put it over the top, and I'm going to knit it up to the present row and put it on my left hand stitch. Now I'm ready. Okay, so if that happens to you, it's not a disaster. Just work slowly, pinch your knitting here so it doesn't run down further anymore. The needles don't, the live stitches don't run down further, and work very slowly. Okay, so continue on this patterned row with the cables right to the end, and then we have to knit back, and I'm going to show you how to do that because it's all bunched together and a little tricky. We've finished now our cabled pattern row, and we've got these little bumpy bits regularly. And now I'm going to knit through with you on the next row, which is going to be a knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, purl 2, so 2 by 2 rib again. And remember, this pattern, you're always going to be knitting the knits and purling the purls. So we knit 2, and then we're going to purl 2, and you'll see that they look like purl stitches even though they're bunched up. And then if you pull these apart, you can see that they're also knit stitches. But if you can't quite see that, just remember knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, purl 2, and once you've passed that bunched up section, if you're ready for a knit 2 and you've got 2 columns of knit, you can think, yes, I'm right, and then keep going. So that's how you get through the row directly afterwards, which is a little trickier. Okay, so I'm knitting and purling in the in-between ones. And then I'm again up to this bunched up section, so that's the back side of the cable. So I've knitted 2, I'm up to a purl 2, and when they're quite bunched up like this and you can't get your needle through, just get it through any old way, give it a tug. Knitting is very elastic, so there's no problem in doing that. And then give this a bit of a tug as well, so you can make sure that you're not going to split any wool, but you're going to get your needle in nicely, like this. Purl 2. Just say you couldn't recognise any of those stitches, and so you hope you've done them right. You know you've just purled 2, and we've got a column of knit 2 stitches, so you know you're right. Okay. So your pattern is going to tell you how many rows you knit before you change to the larger size needles. So do that, and then continue to work the pattern to the given length, and you need to end with the right side row facing for the next row, and then we're going to continue to do the shaping of the hat like this at the end. So I'll see you there. After knitting to the required length that your pattern states, and making sure that your last row was the wrong side row, so you'll have the right side of the pattern facing you, you'll be ready to start the top shaping. And the top shaping takes 17 rows. So the right side of the fabric will have all of the decreases. So you'll be working the decreases only on the right side rows. On the wrong side rows, you'll simply be knitting the knit stitches and purling the purl stitches as you come across them. So if you're new at decreasing, make sure that you count your stitches after each decrease row. the pattern will tell you after each decrease row how many you should have. So that way, if you make a mistake, you're going to pick it up much quicker and you'll only have one row to unravel instead of many rows. So I'll just quickly go over how the decreases is going to happen. If you look at the fabric, we've got a 2x2 rib basically. We've got columns of 2 knit stitches, columns of purl, 2 purl stitches, 2 knit, 2 purl, 2 knit, 2 purl, etc. all the way through. When the fabric's close together, you only see the knit stitches. You have to pull it out to see the columns of purl. So the first row, you're going to be purling the 2 purl stitches to the right of the cable. So this is what I call the cable. And in here, you've got a column of 2 purl stitches. So on every repeat, you will be purling these 2 together to decrease by doing a purl 2 together. So you'll do one here, and then you'll knit, purl, knit, and then here in this repeat, always to the right of the cable pattern, you'll be purling 2 together there, and again here, purling 2 together, and purling 2 together. So that's row 1. Row 2, the odd side, you'll simply be knitting the knits and purling the purls as you come across them. And then you'll be ready for your next decrease row, row 3, and you'll take the next column of 2 purl stitches in every repeat. And that's the column that's directly in between the cable. So the cable pattern, you've got the 2 columns of knit stitches here and here, so these ones here, and you'll be doing a purl 2 together in here, and a purl 2 together in here, etc. And then you knit the knits and purl the purls on the wrong side, and then on your 5th row you'll be purling the column of 2 purl stitches to the left of the cable, this one in here. So here, purl 2 together, here, purl 2 together, here, purl 2 together, etc. So then you've found, after doing that all of your purl columns now only have 1 purl stitch in between them. So you'll be ready to start doing the same thing again, but this time on the columns of 2 knit stitches. And the first column they choose is this long column in between the cables. So you'll be knitting 2 together there, and then purling and knitting, purling in pattern, and then knitting these 2 together on the next long column. Okay, so you'll be decreasing there, and again you knit the knits and purl the purls, and then you take the next column of 2 knit stitches and you'll be knitting those together, and that's the right hand side of the cable. So you'll be knitting those 2 together, decreasing 1 stitch, and every repeat, knitting those 2 together, etc. And then you've got the last column will be the left hand side of the column, and you'll be knitting those 2 together. So after you've done that and knitted the knits and purled the purls on the wrong side row, you will be ending up with a 1x1 rib, which means a knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, knit 1. Okay, so then you'd be ready for row 13, and that's where we have to do the slip 1, knit 2 together, pass slip stitch over, and that's what I'm ready to show you. So I'm going to show you that now. I'm up to row 13, so I've done my decreasing on the knit panels and purl panels, but just so that to remind you, I'm going to show you how to do the decreasing stitches. So that's just simply a knit 2 together, and instead of knitting 1, you put your needle behind 2 stitches and up through the loop, knit them 2 together and off. I'll do that again. So you put it to the left of the second stitch on the needle, you put it up through and knit 2 together. One more time. So you put it, if it's a bit stiff, always put the tip of your needle in and stretch it around, and then it's easy to put through. Knit 2 together. Okay, so I stretch the second one, so that's easy, and then it slides through well. Okay, so that's your knit two together. Your purl two together will look like this. You have the fabric or the wool yarn to the front of the fabric, and then a purl one is like that. A purl two, you just put through both and purl them together, and it decreases. Okay, so again, if your stitches happen to be a little tight on the needle, give them a yank like that. Then it's easy. Put them through, around, purl two together. And again, 1, 2, purl two together. So that's your purl two and knit two together, and that's what you'll need to do all of the decreases from row 1 to row 13. And I'm going to show you now how to do row 13. Okay, here we are. So row 13 starts off with purl 1, and as you know, it's the edge of the fabric, so I always knit 1. Then it says slip 1. So we're slipping it knitwise. We put the needle in as if we're going to knit it, but we don't. We just slip it on to the right-hand needle. And then we're going to knit 2 together. So you've done knit 2 together. And then it says PSSO, and that means pass slip stitch over. So we get this slip stitch that we've just slipped on and not knitted, and we put our left-hand needle in and simply lift it up and over the needle, over the knit 2 together, like that. Okay, so that's what a slip 1, knit 2 together, pass slip stitch over looks like. Then we're told to purl 1, knit 1 and purl 1, and then we're going to repeat that again. So I put the yarn back to the wrong side of the fabric, and I slip 1 knitwise. So you could slip 1 purlwise, that's just like that, as if you were going to purl a stitch, but we slip it knitwise. And then I knit 2 together, and then I pass this slip stitch over by taking my left hand needle, sliding it through, lifting it up and over the knit 2 together stitch, like that. And then I'm ready to purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, put the yarn to the back of the fabric and start again. Slip 1, knit 2 together, pass slip stitch over, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1. I'll show you one more time. So for convenience, I put the yarn to the back of the fabric as if I'm going to knit, and then I knit. I put my needle in like a knit stitch and slip it over, and then I knit the next 2 together off the needle with my left hand needle. I put it in like this, stretch it, lift it up and over the top like that. And I can pull that down, and there it is. Row 17 is just a row of knitting 2 together all the way through. You'll do that 13 times with 1 stitch left over. So knit 2 together, knit 2 together, knit 2 together. Try to keep it a little bit tight. We're right at the end now, so we don't want it to be sloppy. Knit 2 together. Knit 2 together, and you have 1 stitch left over. So there we go. We now have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 stitches left. You can see it starting to come out. like this. So what we have to do now is we break off our yarn and we're going to thread it through these 14 stitches, and we'll pull it tight and fasten it. So, and then we will be sewing the edge together. So make sure when you break off your yarn that you've got enough to sew down the length of the hat. So I would do at least 3 times, I'd go 4 times the length of the hat. That just gives you a lot to play with. It's way too much than what you'll need, but... And then I'm going to thread onto just a darning needle. Thread the end. And then just thread it back through. I'm just slipping it purl-wise, my darning needle, through all of these stitches. Pull it right through. I've got my end because there we go. Okay. You've threaded your yarn through the final stitches, and now we're going to pull tight and then make a stitch with our darning needle to hold it nice and secure. So it's pulled right around here, and you can just make a stitch like this and pull it in as tight as you can. You can do a couple of stitches, you won't notice this. Okay, and then you can put it through the little tiny hole, and we're going to turn the hat inside out, ready to make the seam. Now there's 2 kinds of seams you can make. You could do what's called a mattress seam, and that's where both pieces of the fabric are put side by side like this, and you weave in and out as you go. I don't want to do that seam because it doesn't look very good. I like to have it so that you can't see the seam. When you do that, it can look a little bit messy, or this section here will look wider than any of the purl columns and the rest of the hat. So I'm going to do just a back stitch. The disadvantage for back stitch is that it does provide a tiny little ridge, but that doesn't bother me. If you're super sensitive, then maybe you want to do the mattress stitch. But it doesn't bother me, and it doesn't bother anyone in my family. So maybe you could start with that first if you prefer a better look. So what we're going to do, I've turned the hat inside out so that we've got the right sides facing each other, and we're going to put the corners, this is at the rim of the hat, together, and we're going to get our pins and pin them evenly along. So you want to make sure that you're not going to stretch, so one side stretched and the other's puckered. Okay, so we've got this nice secure yarn up the top here, and we're just going to make sure that these are going to sit flatly. So you can start at both ends, sometimes is a good idea. So I've made sure that those 2 corner stitches are exactly together. Then I'll go back up here and make sure that they're lining, these 2 parts of the seams are lining flat together. And down here. Now these bits here that you can see, that's just where I've joined in a new ball of wool. Okay, so we leave them out and we'll darn them along the seam at the end, or weave them in, however you like to say it. So I'm just making sure that they're fitting very evenly there. So you can see that that's going to be perfectly fitted. So now I'm going to do back stitch. If you don't know how to do back stitch, this is how it goes. So I've secured that. I'm going to take out my first pin, or just move it along a little bit. Put my finger in here, and I can do just say another stitch like this, and I can even put my needle through the loop, and that makes it really tight. I've left my yarn very long, so I'm not going to run out of yarn. So now what I do is I'm going to go through from behind and just pick up the edge stitch on this side of the fabric and the edge stitch here, and put it through like that. I just leave my finger here like that, and then I put it back through the very edge stitches. We don't want a really thick ridge like that, and you can see how I'm going to tighten that. So I make the stitch quite tighten, but all the time I'm doing this, I'm going to stretch the seam to make sure that it's not going to be puckered, but it's going to be just as flexible as the rest of the fabric. So you can see how far away I put my needle in. And this is called backstitch. And I use this for nearly all of my seaming. So if I'm doing any garment, if I'm sewing up side seams on a jumper, or sleeve seams or shoulder seams, this is just a really good all-purpose seam. So I've done a few stitches. And then I check that it's going to be okay. So I'll show you again slowly. I put it in, I'm not sure how much that is, maybe it's 1 centimetre. My needle back in 1 centimetre away from the yarn came out. And then there it is going around. And then I put my yarn back through in the opposite direction, pretty well straight in the middle, and pull that around. And you're only going through the very last stitch on either side of the fabric, so you're not going to have a very big ridge. You can see already that's the little ridge you're going to have there, but you really won't feel that. And then as my needle comes along, I take it out. So I'm going to continue along this seam until I get to the end. So I'm nearly at the end of my seam, and this yarn here is the tail end of my cast on. So I'm going to also darn that back up along here. So I can take my final pin out, and I put my finger here just to make sure that this very corner stitch and this very corner stitch are going to come together. So I've just got a few more to go. Okay, I'm nearly there. I might make 2 more stitches in this bit. You don't want to pull it up too tight, so otherwise it'll... Okay, so I've got just a tiny bit here. I'm going to stretch it out and really find the corner. Okay, so that's the corner stitch, and that's the corner stitch, exactly where my tail for the cast on came out. Okay, and I'm going to go in here, and then I'm going to do an extra stitch here. And this time, instead of pulling it tight, let me just show you, open up this loop. I'm going to go around behind and through. Well, I've made a note. That's actually come out there. So I'm going to do that one again to show you. So I'm going to do it again right through the edge. Back through. Now, instead of just pulling it tight, I'm going to go back behind and up through the loop. And that's like making a knot. So that's very secure. And if you're a little insecure about if it's ever going to come out and you don't want that, if you want it to be sewed up for eternity, then do that a couple of times. Stick your needle in through the loop. And that's just like making a knot. So now I'm going to weave. This is my working sewing thread and that's my tail end. I'm going to weave it back up through here. So you don't want to weave it down to where the knitting is, but you can see, okay, so you can see that there's a little ridge on the inside. But on this side, you're not even going to see it. It's so perfect. See? You can say, so where is my seam? You can't see it. And it just lies in here like the other purl columns. So hopefully that ridge won't bother you. It doesn't bother me, or my daughter, or my husband. So, and I think the finish is just so much nicer, so much more professional looking. So now I'm just going to weave in this little ridge. So you've got two little seams here, just in and out with my needle. And you can sometimes go through the stitches that you've created when you were sewing it together, the sewing up stitches. You want to make it really secure. So I'm just weaving my needle in like this, and then I'm going to pull it through. Okay? And so the end is woven right up there. It's not going to come out, believe me. So I just pull it a little bit tight and then snip it off and then stretch the seam and it's all gone. Okay? So we're going to do the same with the tail end. I'm going to make it a little bit shorter. So that was my cast on end. So I might weave it up the other side this time. You try not to weave everything in the same spot. If you weave multiple ends in the same spot, then you're going to get it a little bit chunkier. So here I am weaving it up here to about there. Pull it through like that. Stretch it back down again, and then I can cut this off with my scissors. Okay. And you can give it a pull to make sure it's going to be fine. And then what I have left over is these two, and that's where I attached a new ball of wool. So one I will weave in this side and one I will weave in that side. Okay, your hat now is finished. There's the top of it, the lovely round little circle, and you can't see where the seam is all the way around. So well done. Congratulations on knitting this hat. It's a beautiful hat. I hope you get a lot of wear and a lot of joy out of it. And thank you for following this tutorial. What you should do, if you like, you don't have to do it, but you can block it.
Now, to block this hat, don't block it by stretching it, because you don't need to do that. You don't want to make it any bigger than what it is. What you can do is let it soak in some lukewarm water. That means a temperature that you would put a baby in. So just not cold, not hot, just so you don't want to shock the wool. Just let it soak for a while, and then you can squeeze the water out like this, and then you wrap it up in a towel. And then what I always do is I stand on my towel, and the weight of my feet or my body just squeezes out the extra moisture, and then you can just leave it somewhere to dry. You don't want to leave it on direct heat or in direct sunlight, but just leave it to dry, and you can pat it out like this or turn it around every so often so it keeps a nice shape and doesn't get a line as if you've pressed it.
I hope you had a great time making this cabled beanie. Thank you so much for watching this video. I would love to see pictures of your finished hat. So if you'd like to post some pictures, you can do so on Ravelry at my Fruity Knitting podcast group, or on Instagram, you can hashtag me with Fruity Knitting, or on Facebook, I'm also Fruity Knitting. So if you've enjoyed this video, please subscribe, because I have regular knitting podcasts and technique and tutorial videos, and leave a comment.